Welcome to the STAM podcast. I'm Adarsh Sandhu, a Deputy Editor of the Journal Science and Technology of Advanced Materials, STAM. This series of podcasts features conversations with eminent materials scientists about the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on their research, education, and related activities. In this episode, we are joined by Professor Atsufumi Hirohata at the Department of Electronic Engineering of the University of York in England. Professor Hirohata's research interests are spintronics and quantum electronics. His teaching activities include introductory nanotechnology, nanoelectronics, mathematics, and information storage and spintronics. So, can you tell me about what you do, your research activities?
So I am working on spintronic devices and magnetic materials. So we've been working on developing new concept spintronic devices which have low energy consumption and high efficiency.
What kind of applications do you see for your research?
So our ultimate goal is to make a computer type device with instantly on, power on type devices. So normally the devices we are using currently have the power consumption at certain level, even though without doing anything. But our ultimate goal is to make those kind of devices to be available, which can only turn on whenever you need it, which may reduce your power consumption significantly.
Okay, let's go back to March. And I was wondering what you were thinking when news was coming out of China and so on about a possible epidemic and a pandemic. What were your thoughts about your research, about education generally? What were you thinking at the sort of prior to lockdown, prior to the people being unable to move?
So my feeling was it wasn't that serious, to be honest, in the beginning. And especially the reason is it wasn't doing anything seriously in the UK or even in Japan or mainly in Europe. And at that time, the general attitude in the department as well as the university was quite relaxed. But then suddenly things get changed after the problem or huge issues in Italy. And then we started to discuss what we should do as the department and also as the university. And then we decided to lock down everything from the afternoon on the Friday, the 20th of March. And then we have stayed at home.
I see. What did you do about the equipment in your lab?
So the instruction we were given from the university was basically to turn off everything, as many equipment as possible. So for my case, I turned off all my deposition systems as well as X-ray diffractometer and all the measurement setups. Only thing I left turned on is the chiller for the X-ray diffractometer, because that just simply runs the cooling water to the equipment. But currently the university is thinking about reopening the labs under the strict measure of the coronavirus issues. So we are trying to sort out how we can make our labs to be safe as possible. But basically all the equipment are turned off.
How did you cope with your staff? For example, you have postdocs, you have students and so on. How did you sort of get the message across, and how do you now interact with them?
So I have two postdocs, and both of them are in contact via email. And luckily, all my PhD students have already graduated, so I don't have any PhD students currently, but I had several visiting students, so they went home much before the lockdown started because we discussed those issues privately, and then we decided to send them back home. That happened about 2 weeks before the lockdown. And for the postdocs, they are writing paper currently because that's the only thing we can do. And some problem we have is we do not have access to the data, especially one of the postdocs who've been taking many images using TM and SEMs. He cannot access to his data. So currently he's writing the introduction, experimental procedures, and some part of the results chapters which do not need those images.
And how have you coped with this very, very long? It was going to be 1 month initially, then now it's become much longer. How have you been coping both in terms of science and research, and also sort of developing a daily routine, which is totally different, I expect, from what you would do normally?
Yes, you're right. So currently I am the departmental chair of the Exceptional Circumstances Committee. So I've been handling about 5 to 15 applications every day to give some extensions or receipts for those students who are in trouble. So I've managed to make myself to be quite busy. And in the at the very first stage of the lockdown, I had a bit more time because it was during the Easter holiday. So I've been making some slides for the online courses because the university decided to convert all the lectures and all the meetings to be online for this term. So I have to make some lectures to be available online version, and also all the exams during this term, because this is the final term of the academic year, to be 24-hour open exam, because some of the students already go back home. So we allow them to be able to access to the exam scripts for 24 hours. So that means they can also access all the information through internet. So I had to make some of the exam questions to be a bit more difficult than usual.
And how are you finding teaching online? It's not something which most people have experience of doing. What are the pros and cons, do you think?
I think the main problem we face is the interactions between the students and ourselves, because for most of the cases, or rather all the cases, we ask them to turn off their video and also turn off their audio so that we can maintain certain bandwidth for the internet. And that means we don't see any faces of the students. So whether they get bored or whether they get enthusiastic. So we have almost no interactions with students, unfortunately. And then they usually send us their questions through the chat functionality. And some students explain as much as possible, but some of them just give us very brief questions, so we may get confused what they really want to ask. And then in the end, they decided to send us an email afterwards. So we had to spend certain time by email. And for email explanation, it's always very difficult because, of course, we can attach some equations and some figures, but it's not ideal. And also some students have their brothers and sisters, and they have the online schools as well. So they have huge difficulty to run both in parallel. So some of the students, about half of them, decided to simply take all the lectures through the recorded version. So that means they do not attend the lecture, but they take the recorded version afterwards, and then they send us questions. So it is very different from the usual lectures.
Have you found any other issues related to online teaching?
So the main concern the students have is in the UK system, especially in electronic engineering, all our courses are accredited by the IET, which is the Institute of Electronic Engineers in the UK. And that is why the students can easily get the job, because they graduated with certain degree first or 2-1 and so on with the IET accredited courses. And now we are in discussion with the IET, and they agree as long as we meet the teaching outcomes, they can still maintain the accredited states. So it is okay, but still there are some difficulties, especially the experimental part and practical parts, because almost half of our modules are one way or the other associated with laboratories, and currently we cannot run any laboratories. And even after the lockdown relaxed, the government asked us to make sure all the social distance issues and so on. So it is impossible for us to run the labs, which means these students may get their degrees without doing reasonable amount of practical works, which is a very big concern.
Back to research. What do you think is going to happen with conferences and networking? Will people be happy with virtual conferences and so on?
I think it is a very difficult question and very timely question. I am involved with the IEEE Magnetic Society, which is the largest international society in our field. And I am currently a treasurer, secretary treasurer, and we cancelled one of our largest international conferences in May, which was to be held in Montreal in Canada, but because of the state emergency by the Canadian government, we had to cancel the conference. And we have another flagship conference coming in this November, and we decided this one to go completely online. So we are now currently discussing what kind of format we will go for. In order to run the conference, usually more than half of the presentations are done as a poster. So those poster presentations are also another problem. So if people are happy to have the online conferences, but still majority of the attendees cannot make any presentations. That is one of the problems. And also people we set up an ad hoc committee to discuss this, because if the situation doesn't improve, we may need to make the next year conferences to be online as well. And then we will face huge problem not to have any networking activities. Especially we usually run women in magnetism and also young professionals meetings, which are very popular for them to get next jobs and also to interact with various peoples. And those activities we cannot run. So we are looking for some other form of the networking activities, which is a very big challenge for us.
Is there a solution? I mean, I'm wondering if IT and all the wonderful stuff we have will provide a solution to this inability to actually meet, but at least exchange ideas and sort of extend our networking. Do you think there is a good example out there where people have managed to overcome this or not?
I think it is difficult. On the other day, we had a meeting with about 2,600 participants using Zoom. So it is possible to run a very big event. But of course, people are just having some problems with the internet, and not everybody can talk. So we may need to go for bit smaller scale interactions, and then we need to make sure we can provide certain level of services.
Okay, what if we just sort of consider the whole situation now? What specific, if I can use the word damage, is probably a very strong word, but I'm wondering what aspect of your research and your sort of education do you think has been most affected by this, that you can probably never replace? Are there things that you think will never be able to be sort of, you can't compensate for them in any way?
I suspect I think it will be the same all over the world. So the university may become two groups. One is research-oriented and another one is teaching-oriented groups. And then each government may just fund those research-oriented universities only. And then the problem is, because the students have to pay the same tuition fee, so they try to go for the better universities for obvious reasons, and those universities make their lectures available online. So to be honest, my personal view is I don't see much point from the student side to pay a very expensive tuition fee to get a certain level of education. So there will be a big change in the tuition fee system and also the university entrance exam and so on, because then people may choose much more like the open university type model, so they can select online modules by themselves, and then somebody will count how many modules they took, and then they can get the credit for it. So that means probably it will become more open for the students, whichever universities they can choose, and also whichever modules they can choose to satisfy their degree program. So it will be a big challenge for us as lecturers to provide high level or good level of lectures to compete with other universities.
What about careers, do you think? I mean, if the system changes, then obviously the companies and industry looking at, not necessarily just industry, but even the civil service and what have you, their hiring practices will change, I guess, and the type of person they're looking for will probably become a bit different to pinpoint, because they don't have the grades as you would in a normal situation. You have the first or 2-1 or whatever it is. Have you seen any changes in your sort of locally in terms of how companies are approaching, getting students for their own, for careers and so on?
So to date, I don't see much differences in their hiring exercises. But of course, as you said, they may change their hiring exercises. At the moment, I know some of my supervisees who are graduating, they have the online interviews and they seem to get more or less similar questions as usual. But of course, if this situation continues and then quite a few students do not have reasonable level of the practical skills because they do not have access to the practical courses, and then of course the companies may change their attitude towards the graduate students.
What about the positive effects, positive aspects of this shutdown? Have you seen any? I mean, if we look through history, we can, pick up people like Newton, where he did most of his work, but we are not all Newton. I'm wondering if there's anything positive that has come out in your particular case.
So, I think as associate editor for a scientific journal, we don't. I was hoping to see much more increase in the paper submission, but actually, I don't see much change. And initially, people agree to review papers much more, but looks like people become very busy after the lockdown continues. So there isn't much benefit so far based on the situation. But of course, I'm personally starting to write a book, so which may be a good thing, but
not directly related to research, but I was wondering how you've been looking after your health during the lockdown.
I think we are trying to take some online courses to get some exercise, which is a good thing, and we go out for the shopping, and that's more or less the only thing we are allowed to do. But apart from that, we don't do much, and I think it is a good idea to learn something new. And I know some of my friends started to self-learning the Python and some other programming languages, which is a good thing. But personally, I'm not good at programming, so I need to find something I can learn.
So what about the future? I mean, how do you see this playing out? We all don't know the answer to this question, but assuming that things become a bit more relaxed and you can go back to university and so on, how do you see the next, 6 months, 8 months panning out? Do you think it'll take at least 6 months to get back to where you were, for example, a month ago, 2 months ago? Or what do you think is going to happen for the remainder of the year?
So in the UK, some of the shops will be reopened in next month, and the plan is all the shops and restaurants and so on will be reopened on the 15th of June. And some of the schools which have the facilities to handle the social distances and so on will be reopened next month as well. So the university may be the next step. So I suspect towards the end of next month, the university, at least the academic staff as well as some of the labs which can be safe, can reopen by the end of next month. That's my hope. And once the labs are reopened, and then we can start to restart our research activities, which may take at least a month to get the regular levels. But then the main concern is if we have the second wave of the pandemic, and then we may have to go back to the lockdown state again. So it will be like an oscillatory behavior. So we may be able to work certain period of time, and then we have to go back to the lockdown state, and the amplitude will become smaller and smaller, hopefully. So as you said, it may take at least 6 months, maybe up to 1 year. I think the German friends told me the German government predicts they may not be able to travel abroad within this year. So I think all the countries may have similar situation. So by the end of this year, we may see better picture, but in order to go back to the state where we were, it may take at least 1 year.
Finally, what do you miss the most? I mean, of the normality that we had 2.5 months ago.
Yes, yeah, because you said many things. We miss going to the restaurants, going to the conferences, meeting some friends, and so on. And as an academic in the university, I think the main thing I'm missing is to meet my group members and also my colleagues and students, to have some interactions, because our research, we can read our papers and so on online, so that's not a problem, but through some conversations over coffee and lunch, we may find some interesting idea. So those are something I miss quite a bit.
This concludes this edition of the STAM podcast. Comments and suggestions can be sent to the STAM editorial office using the email shown in the STAM Insights website, which also includes links to the latest papers published in STAM. On behalf of the editorial staff, all the people behind the scenes working hard to publish STAM, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your company again.